If you have followed our channel for some time now, then you may already be familiar with this name, Friedrich Nietzsche. We've mentioned him in several videos before, such as our video on nihilism where we used one of his famous quotes, "God is dead," and more recently in our video on existentialism, discussing his theory of the eternal recurrence. But who exactly was Friedrich Nietzsche, and why should you care? Well, to put it simply, Nietzsche was one of the most influential philosophers of all time. He profoundly impacted various fields of study from literature to psychology to sociology, theology, and even physics. His work paved the way for many new ideas and movements, some of them being quite controversial even today. So in this video, we will take a look at some of his main ideas and try to see why he matters even today. Now, if you haven't heard of Nietzsche before, or perhaps just vaguely know that he is some kind of evil guy who wrote about Superman and stuff, well, first of all, you're not alone. Not many people understand Nietzsche's work and the impact it had and continues to have. But also, Nietzsche didn't really want to be famous anyway. He hated how common people misused his work to suit their own agenda. In fact, he would probably hate the fact that we are making a video about him right now. So maybe this video is already a disservice to the great philosopher himself. Nietzsche was born in 1844 in Germany and died in 1900. During his lifetime, he published 5 major books: The Birth of Tragedy, The Philosophy and the Tragic Age of Greece, The Genealogy of Morals, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and Twilight of the Idols. There is also another book called Ex Homo where he basically explains what each of these books is about and talks about his overall philosophy. All of these were written in German, by the way, and Twilight of the Idols was actually his last publication while he was still alive. So what happened after he died? Well, posthumously, his sister Elizabeth published the Will to Power, which contains some notes and fragments left behind by Nietzsche. It was named the Will to Power because Nietzsche had been working on a book with that exact title, but he never finished it, and she heavily edited the book, adding things that she thought suited her own political views. This caused even more confusion around Nietzsche's work, especially since he had been very vague about his political views during his life. Did he support the Nazis or not? To this day, people argue over whether or not Nietzsche would have supported Nazism and why they think so. But let's leave politics out of this. In 1960, Walter Kaufmann published a collection of Nietzsche's work called The Will to Power, where he removed the additions made by Elizabeth and published the original notes by Nietzsche. This is the one usually referred to as the Will to Power nowadays. Nietzsche's works have been translated into dozens of languages and are still studied all across the world. So what did he actually talk about? What are some of his main ideas? Well, as we said before, he wrote about a lot of different topics and he wasn't afraid to tackle any subject. But one of his main ideas can be summed up with one word: will. And to explain this idea, we need to start at the beginning. In his book The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche discusses the origins of Greek tragedy. He saw Greek tragedies as an art form that expressed a fundamental truth about life, a fundamental truth that most people ignore. This truth is essentially the balance between two forces, the will to live and the will to die. These two wills, of course, aren't literally two separate things, but they are complementary aspects of existence. In other words, they are complementary aspects of the same thing, the will to power. You see, according to Nietzsche, everything in life is about power, including ourselves. We are all just trying to exert our power onto others and into the world. And yes, this includes suffering as well. Many people, Nietzsche believed, mistakenly view suffering as something bad, something to avoid at all costs. But in reality, suffering is just another aspect of the will to power. After all, without pain, how would you know what it means to feel good? Without loss, how would you know what it means to love something? Suffering and loss, according to Nietzsche, are necessary conditions to truly experience anything at all. They are part of the same will that drives us to experience all of life's pleasures. That drive is called the will to power. In fact, the will to power is what makes life worth living. According to Nietzsche, there are many ways to express this will, but it all boils down to the affirmation of life. Affirmation of life is essentially embracing the totality of life, both its positive and negative aspects, both pleasure and pain, both loss and love, both destruction and creation. It's about embracing it all and growing stronger from it. This brings us to Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, which is often misinterpreted as the Übermensch being some sort of master race that conquers everyone else. However, the Übermensch isn't any particular group of people. It's anyone who embraces the will to power, who affirms life in all of its aspects. Essentially, The Übermensch is someone who has overcome nihilism. Nihilism, according to Nietzsche, is when one denies the value of life, when one rejects the will to power. This can happen for many reasons, one of them being that nihilism is often a response to a lack of meaning in life, either because one hasn't found their purpose yet, or because they believe their purpose has been taken away from them. But either way, nihilism is essentially the opposite of the will to power. The nihilist doesn't affirm life. They deny it. They don't want to embrace the totality of existence. Instead, they reject parts of it. They reject the pain and suffering, the loss and the death. They only want to live for the pleasures and the love. The problem is, according to Nietzsche, that if you reject the negative aspects of life, you can't truly experience the positive aspects either. If you deny the suffering, you can't truly experience the love. If you reject the pain, you can't truly experience the joy. For example, if you have never experienced sadness, how could you possibly know what it means to feel happy? If you have never lost something, how could you ever know what it means to love something? So how does one become the Übermensch then? How does one affirm life in all of its aspects? Well, the answer to that question lies in the concept of amor fati. Amor fati essentially means loving your fate, but it's more than just passively accepting what life throws at you. It's actively choosing to embrace it, both the good and the bad. It's actively choosing to love your suffering, to love your fate. And this is how one becomes the Übermensch, by embracing the will to power, by affirming life in all of its aspects, by loving their fate. Now, this is just a very simplified explanation of Nietzsche's philosophy. In reality, he wrote about a lot of different topics and his ideas are quite complex and take a lot of unpacking. But hopefully this gives you a bit of a framework to understand his main ideas and how they relate to each other. So why should you care about Nietzsche even today? Well, because his ideas are more relevant than ever. In a world where everything can feel meaningless and purposeless, where many people struggle with depression and nihilism, Nietzsche's ideas can be a guiding light to those who seek it. His ideas can help us find meaning in a meaningless world, purpose in a pointless life. His ideas can help us love our fate and affirm life in all of its aspects. Nietzsche's philosophy is not for everyone, that's for sure, but for those who seek it, it can be a life-changing experience. So if you feel lost and confused, if you feel like your purpose has been taken away from you, if you feel like nothing matters, then perhaps it's time to discover the will to power. Thank you for watching. The concept of the will to power, der Wille zur Macht, is one of Friedrich Nietzsche's most profound and controversial philosophical ideas, often interpreted as the central driving force of life. It goes far beyond the common notion of power as domination over others. For Nietzsche, the will to power is a fundamental principle underlying all human behavior, creativity, and even the structure of reality itself. It is not merely about political strength or physical might. It is the inner force, the primal impulse, that pushes every living being to grow, expand, overcome, and assert itself. Nietzsche saw life as a constant process of becoming, and in that process, every organism strives to express its fullest potential. This striving is not driven primarily by survival, as Darwin suggested, nor by pleasure as he believed hedonism proposed, but by the desire to overcome limitations and increase one's capacity to act, influence, and create. In this sense, the will to power is a creative force. Artists express it through their works, thinkers through their ideas, leaders through their vision, and individuals through self-mastery and the transformation of their circumstances.